Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. The dim glow of the starboard lights bathed the otherwise sterile room in shades of cobalt. Lieutenant Ethan Cross sat at the corner of the Galactic Outpost's cantina, nursing a bitter drink and a deep, lingering boredom. The mission was supposed to be simple. Act as the Terran envoy on the remote planet of Zorith Prime, a strategic hub between the Galactic Union and the uncharted void. Diplomatic missions rarely excited him, but this posting took the monotony to a whole new level. The cantina door hissed open, and silence followed. Zorathians, a species of shimmering, crystalline-skinned bipeds, weren't prone to theatrics, but even they turned their multifaceted eyes to the newcomer. She wasn't one of them. She was something else entirely. She moved like water, fluid and deliberate. Her azure skin glimmered faintly, as if lit from within, and her elongated limbs bore an elegance that whispered of otherworldly beauty. Her eyes, deep and violet, locked onto Ethan's with an intensity that made his pulse stutter. Ethan tried to focus on his drink, but it was impossible. The woman, or whatever she was, crossed the room with purpose, her gaze unwavering. She stopped at his table, and the chatter in the cantina resumed, though quieter, as if the patrons were eager to overhear whatever was about to unfold. "Lieutenant Ethan Cross," she said, her voice resonating with a peculiar harmony that vibrated in his bones. "You're the Terran ambassador here?" He set his drink down, trying to keep his composure. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Mirana," she said, sliding gracefully into the seat opposite him. "And I need your help." Ethan leaned back, studying her. He'd seen countless alien species in his years as an officer, but Mirana was unlike any of them. She had the bearing of someone who carried the weight of her people's fate. "Help with what?" he asked cautiously. She hesitated, her long fingers interlocking on the table. "I want to be a mother." The statement hit him like a blaster bolt. Ethan blinked, unsure he'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me? I want to conceive a child," Mirana repeated, her tone unwavering. "And I want you to be the father." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Ethan processed her words. It wasn't the strangest request he'd ever encountered in space. Aliens had odd customs, and diplomacy often required navigating murky waters of cultural exchange. But this was personal, far too personal. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mirana, I think you've got the wrong idea. Humans don't. We don't just—" "Let me explain," she interrupted, her voice a plea wrapped in desperation. Ethan paused, caught off guard by the raw emotion in her eyes. "My people, the Zelithari, are on the brink of extinction," Mirana began, her words trembling slightly. "Our genetic diversity has collapsed. Centuries of isolation and a long-forgotten war with an enemy we no longer even name have left us unable to reproduce within our species." Ethan's military instincts kicked in, his mind racing. "Why me? Surely there are other species, other genetic pools you could turn to." She shook her head, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We've tried. Zelithari DNA is particular. Our biologists have spent decades searching for compatible species. Your people, humans, are the only ones who share the right genetic markers to allow successful conception." Ethan's hand tightened around his glass. The weight of her words settled on him like a physical burden. He glanced around the cantina, half expecting a hidden camera crew to jump out and tell him this was some bizarre prank. But the earnestness in Mirana's expression left no room for doubt. "And you're asking me?" he said, incredulous. "Out of all the humans you could find, why come to me?" "You were chosen," Mirana replied simply. "Your military record, your genetic profile, your compatibility with our reproductive process. It all aligns. I was sent here to find you specifically." Ethan stared at her, trying to reconcile the absurdity of the situation with the sincerity in her voice. "You're telling me your species' survival depends on me? Fathering a hybrid child?" "Yes," she said, leaning closer, her hands clutching his. Her touch was warm, almost electric. "I know this is sudden, and I understand the weight of what I'm asking. But you must believe me when I say that you may be the last hope for the Zelithari." He pulled his hands back, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Duty, curiosity, disbelief, and a faint undercurrent of something he couldn't quite name. "Mirana, I don't even know you," he said finally. "This isn't something I can just agree to on a whim." "I don't expect you to decide now," she said softly, standing. "But time is not on our side. Our fertility window is closing rapidly, and once it does," her voice broke, and she took a moment to collect herself. "Please, Lieutenant, consider what I've said. You know where to find me." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan to grapple with the strangest, most consequential decision of his life. The following day, Lieutenant Ethan Cross couldn't shake the strange encounter with Mirana. Her plea echoed in his mind, intertwining with questions he couldn't answer. As he walked through the winding corridors of the outpost, his thoughts churned like a restless sea. He barely noticed the Zorathian workers bustling around him, their crystalline forms catching the pale sunlight streaming through the dome's high windows. Ethan's feet carried him, almost unconsciously, toward the diplomatic wing. Mirana had said he'd know where to find her, and he realized she must have meant the visitor quarters reserved for interspecies envoys. As he neared the section, a faint anxiety stirred in his chest. He wasn't entirely sure why he was going to see her. Curiosity, duty, or something more primal? An unspoken desire to understand her desperation? The door to her quarters slid open with a soft chime after Ethan pressed the buzzer. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the air filled with the faint scent of something floral yet alien. Mirana sat cross-legged on a low, circular platform that seemed to hover just above the ground. Her violet eyes opened as he entered, and she stood gracefully, a hint of hope flickering across her features. "Lieutenant Cross," she said, her voice softer than it had been the night before. "I didn't expect you so soon." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You left me with a lot to think about." "I hoped you'd come," she admitted, gesturing for him to sit. "Please make yourself comfortable." He hesitated before taking a seat across from her. The platform adjusted to his weight, humming faintly. Mirana sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap, her posture poised but relaxed. "I still don't understand why you think I'm the right person for this," Ethan began. "You said humans are genetically compatible, but that's not enough to explain why you'd single me out." Mirana's gaze dropped, and for the first time, he saw a vulnerability in her that hadn't been there the night before. "You're right. There's more to it than I told you." Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "Our compatibility isn't just biological," she continued, her voice tinged with hesitation. "It's emotional, psychological. Zelithary reproduction is a deeply intimate process, one that requires a profound connection between both individuals. We don't conceive through mere physical interaction. It's a union of minds, emotions, and energy. That's why I came to you." Ethan frowned, trying to wrap his head around the concept. "A union of minds? What does that even mean?" "Our biologists determined that your neural patterns align uniquely with our own," Mirana explained. "Your experiences, your resilience, the way you think. It's all compatible. It's difficult to put into words, but you're the only human we've encountered who possesses this alignment." He let out a low whistle, leaning back slightly. "So, you're saying I'm some kind of cosmic soulmate for your species?" Her lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes remained serious. "If you want to put it that way." Ethan shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane. You're asking me to create a child, an entirely new life, with someone I met less than 24 hours ago. Do you even know what you're asking?" Mirana leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I know exactly what I'm asking, Ethan. I know it's more than anyone should ever ask of a stranger. But my people are dying. The Zelithary were once a thriving civilization, explorers and scholars who sought to unravel the mysteries of the universe. Now we're a shadow of what we were, and every year, our numbers dwindle. If we don't act now, there won't be a future for us." Her words struck a chord in Ethan, stirring a mixture of empathy and unease. He'd seen the aftermath of extinction firsthand during his tours on other planets. Entire civilizations reduced to ruins and whispers in the galactic archives. The thought of an entire species disappearing, their stories and legacy lost forever, weighed heavily on him. Still, the enormity of what she was asking wasn't something he could ignore. "And if I say no?" he asked quietly. Miranda's shoulders sagged slightly, but she met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Then I'll respect your decision. I'll leave and search elsewhere, though I fear there's no one else who can fulfill this role. But know that if you choose to help, you won't be alone. Our people would honor you as a savior. And I—" She hesitated, her voice softening. "I would be eternally grateful." Ethan studied her for a long moment, searching her face for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. But all he saw was sincerity and a deep, aching sadness. "What would happen to the child?" he asked finally. Miranda's expression brightened slightly, as if his question gave her hope. "The child would be a bridge between our species. They would carry the legacy of both humans and Zelithari, uniting our people in ways we've only dreamed of. They would be raised with love, surrounded by knowledge and culture from both worlds." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly. I need time." "Of course," Miranda said, her tone understanding. "Take as much time as you need. But please don't take too long. The future of my people depends on it." As Ethan rose to leave, her words lingered in his mind, a quiet plea that refused to be ignored. He walked back to his quarters, knowing that whatever choice he made, his life and the galaxy would never be the same. Ethan lay awake in his quarters, staring at the metallic ceiling of the Terran outpost. The dim, ambient hum of the station's power grid filled the room, a sound that was usually comforting. Tonight, it only deepened the storm of thoughts raging in his mind. Miranda's plea wasn't something he could dismiss. It wasn't just about biology or cultural diplomacy, it was about the survival of an entire species. Her desperation wasn't theatrical or manipulative. It was raw and real, and it terrified him. The idea of fathering a child was something he'd never seriously entertained. His life had been a string of deployments, his days filled with military protocols and his nights spent in the fleeting company of stars. Settling down, much less creating a new life, had always been a distant thought, buried beneath layers of duty and pragmatism. But this wasn't about settling down. It was about stepping into uncharted territory, not just for him but for humanity and the Zelithari. As morning approached, Ethan found himself back in the cantina, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The Zorathian bartender watched him with their usual impassive stare, their crystalline face unreadable. The cantina was nearly empty, save for a few maintenance crew members finishing their shifts. His datapad buzzed, breaking his reverie. A message had arrived from Admiral Keen, the Terran officer overseeing the sector. "Cross. Update me on the Zelithari diplomat's visit. Any concerns I should be aware of?" Ethan stared at the message, tapping the edge of the datapad against the table. How was he supposed to explain the situation? That an alien woman had asked him to father a child in what could only be described as the galaxy's most unusual diplomatic crisis? He typed a vague reply, "No issues. We'll provide a detailed report soon." As soon as the message sent, Ethan sighed and leaned back in his chair. He was stalling, and he knew it. "Lieutenant." The voice, melodic and unmistakable, made him sit up. Miranda stood at the cantina's entrance, her lithe form outlined by the light from the corridor. She wore a flowing garment that shimmered like liquid starlight, her presence commanding yet unassuming. Ethan gestured for her to join him. "Miranda." She approached, her movements fluid and deliberate, and took the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching like the vastness of space. "Have you made your decision?" she asked finally, her tone gentle but laced with urgency. Ethan looked down at his coffee, the dark liquid reflecting the faint blue of the cantina lights. "Not yet. This isn't something I can decide overnight." "I understand," she said, though her hands fidgeted slightly, betraying her calm exterior. "But time is slipping away. I wish I could give you all the time you need." But our window is narrowing. How much time do we have? He asked. 2 weeks, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After that, the compatibility process won't work. And it will be too late. Ethan exhaled sharply, leaning forward. Miranda, you're asking me to change everything about my life in an instant. I'm not saying no, but I need to understand more. If I agree, what happens next? What's this union of minds you mentioned? She nodded, as if she had anticipated the question. It's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. When a zelithary and a compatible partner attempt conception, their neural patterns align in a process we call the bonding. It's more than a physical act. It's a merging of thoughts, memories, and emotions. It creates a connection so deep that it transcends language and biology. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're saying I'd be able to read your mind? In a sense, Miranda replied. But it's not invasive. It's a shared experience, one that allows us to understand one another on a level that words can't reach. It's why zelithary reproduction is so rare and so sacred. The weight of her explanation settled over him. The idea of something, accessing his innermost thoughts was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. And the child, he asked, what kind of life would they have? Would they be treated like some kind of experiment? Never, Miranda said firmly. The child would be celebrated, a symbol of hope for both our peoples. They would be raised with love, surrounded by the knowledge and culture of both worlds. And you, she hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. And me, Ethan prompted. You would have a place in their life, she said, her voice softer. If you choose to. The bonding isn't just about conception. It creates a lasting connection. You wouldn't just be the father biologically. You'd be part of something greater. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. The stakes were enormous, the implications staggering. This wasn't just about him or even Miranda, it was about the future of an entire species. I need one more day, he said finally, his voice steady but strained. Miranda nodded, though the flicker of worry in her eyes remained. I'll wait, but please, Ethan, don't take too long. As she stood and left the cantina, Ethan sat alone with his thoughts, the enormity of his choice pressing down on him. This wasn't just a question of helping an alien species. It was a question of what kind of man he wanted to be. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cross realized he wasn't just staring into the void of space. He was staring into the unknown, and the choice he made would shape the destiny of more than just himself. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. By the time dawn, or the simulated equivalent on Zorith Prime, arrived, he had made his decision. As much as the weight of Miranda's request unsettled him, he couldn't shake the sense of responsibility bearing down on his shoulders. He joined the Terran Alliance to make a difference, and this was a difference unlike anything he'd ever imagined. He made his way to Miranda's quarters with purpose, his heart pounding in his chest. When the door slid open to reveal her sitting in quiet meditation, her violet eyes opened, and for the first time, he noticed a flicker of vulnerability in her serene expression. You've decided, she said, rising gracefully to her feet. Ethan nodded. I'll help you. Relief washed over her face, and she placed a hand over her heart. Thank you, Ethan. You've done something I can never repay. Don't thank me yet, he said, forcing a small smile. I still don't entirely know what I've signed up for. Miranda's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then let me show you. The Zelithary's medical bay was unlike any facility Ethan had ever seen. Its walls shimmered with a subtle iridescence, and the air hummed with a faint, melodic vibration that seemed to resonate with his very thoughts. Miranda led him to the center of the room, where an intricate, circular platform pulsed with light. This is the bonding chamber, Miranda explained, gesturing to the platform. It's where our minds will align, and the connection will be formed. You may feel exposed, but I promise it is not painful. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his nerves prickling. You're really selling this whole union of minds thing. Are you sure there's no hidden catches? No side effects I should know about? Miranda chuckled softly, a sound that eased his tension slightly. The process is disorienting at first, but it's safe. Our scientists have conducted countless simulations to ensure your mind won't be harmed. Countless simulations? Ethan muttered. Great. Just what I wanted to hear. He stepped onto the platform, the surface warm beneath his boots. Miranda joined him, her gaze steady and reassuring. As the platform activated, a dome of light enveloped them, dimming the rest of the room. Miranda reached out, her hands hovering inches from his. Are you ready? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Ready as I'll ever be. The moment their hands touched, a surge of energy coursed through him, and the world dissolved into a cascade of colors and sensations. First, it was chaos. Ethan's mind felt as though it were being unraveled. Every thought and memory laid bare. Images from his childhood, playing catch with his father, sneaking cookies from the kitchen, blurred together with moments of triumph and failure from his military career. Emotions swirled like a storm, raw and unfiltered. Then he felt her. Miranda's presence was a calm, soothing current in the maelstrom. He sensed her thoughts, her memories, her very essence flowing into him. He saw flashes of her life. A bustling Zelithary city, its towers glowing with a soft, inner light. Her parents, their crystalline forms shimmering with pride as they watched her excel in her studies. The desolation of a crumbling society as the Zelithary birth rate plummeted. Her desperation was palpable. Her fear of extinction a weight she carried every moment of her life. But beneath it all, there was hope, a fragile, flickering light that had brought her to him. Ethan reached out, not physically but mentally, and felt her respond. Their thoughts intertwined, a delicate dance of understanding and connection. He sensed her awe at the resilience of humanity, her fascination with the boundless creativity and determination of his species. And she sensed him, his doubts, his fears, his reluctance to take on this monumental responsibility. But she also saw his determination, his unwillingness to let an entire species fade into the void. Slowly, the chaos subsided, and their minds settled into a harmonious rhythm. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. An intimacy deeper than words or touch, a complete understanding of another being's soul. When the light faded, Ethan found himself standing on the platform, his hands still clasping Miranda's. Her violet eyes met his, and in that moment, he realized something had changed between them. Is it done? He asked, his voice hoarse. Miranda nodded, her expression radiant. The bonding is complete. Our connection will guide the conception process, ensuring the compatibility of our DNA. The child will be strong, carrying the best traits of both our species. Ethan stepped back, his mind still reeling from the experience. He felt raw, as though every barrier he'd ever built around himself had been stripped away. Yet, there was a strange sense of clarity, a newfound understanding of Miranda and her people. What happens now? He asked. We proceed to the next stage, Miranda said, her tone gentle. But for now, you should rest. The bonding takes a toll on the mind, and you'll need time to recover. Ethan nodded, though he doubted he'd find much rest. As he left the medical bay, he couldn't help but feel that his life had shifted in a way he could never have anticipated. This wasn't just about saving the Zelithary anymore. It was about forging something entirely new. A bridge between two species, a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. The next few days passed in a blur of discomfort and confusion. Ethan had expected the process to be disorienting, but nothing had prepared him for the depth of the experience. After the bonding, his thoughts felt clouded, as though every corner of his mind was filled with an unshakable sense of presence. Miranda's presence. It wasn't just that her thoughts had entered his. It was more as if they had become one, intertwining in ways that were both comforting and unnerving. Every time he closed his eyes, he could feel her there, a silent companion in the back of his mind. At first, he'd thought it would pass. But as the days wore on, he realized this was no fleeting sensation. It was permanent. Their connection was undeniable. It was as if a thread between their minds had been woven, binding them together in ways that felt both intimate and impossibly alien. Miranda had warned him that the connection might take time to adjust to, but Ethan wasn't sure he could ever truly get used to it. It was not just the lingering presence of her thoughts, but the knowledge that soon, very soon, they would be taking the next step, the physical act of conception. He wasn't sure what he was expecting from that moment. For a man raised in the military, where emotions were often suppressed and every decision was made with cold practicality, the concept of bringing new life into the universe in such an unconventional way was almost overwhelming. There was no protocol for this kind of mission. Miranda had given him space, both physical and mental, to process what had transpired. But he could feel her every time he drifted off into thought. Her presence would linger, a soft whisper of reassurance that both grounded and unnerved him. It was late one evening when Miranda arrived at his quarters, her long, flowing silhouette casting a quiet shadow against the light of the station. He had expected her, but the sight of her still caused a stir in his chest. There was a quiet grace in her movements, a calm that seemed to permeate every aspect of her being. "Miranda," Ethan said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "I can feel your hesitation," she said softly, her violet eyes studying him with a depth that seemed to reach beyond his surface. "You've been distant since the bonding. I know this is hard for you." Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and paced around the small space, trying to make sense of everything he was feeling. "I didn't expect it to be like this," he admitted. "The connection, it's more than I thought. It's like you're always with me, and I can't think without you being there." Miranda's voice was gentle. "That is the bonding, Ethan. You are never alone now. But it's more than a connection. It's a promise, not only to me but to my people. You've done more than I could have hoped for, and I'll never forget what you've given us." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "But what if I can't do this? What if I can't be the father you need? What if—" "You won't be alone in this," she interrupted, stepping closer. "This is not just about us. This is about the future of my species. We need you, but you are not alone in this." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean. All I know is that one decision could change everything. I can't go back after this." Miranda reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. "No, you can't. But if you've come this far, I know you will see it through. Trust me, Ethan. Trust that you're doing the right thing." Her touch was warm, comforting. For a moment, the storm of confusion in Ethan's mind began to settle. It wasn't that the decision became easier, but somehow it felt less daunting. He nodded slowly, as if giving himself permission to accept the gravity of what was coming. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll help you. I'll help your people." Miranda's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you." The days leading up to the conception were a blur of preparation. While the bonding had already linked their minds, the physical act required a level of intimacy that neither of them could fully prepare for. In some ways, Ethan found it difficult to separate the deep mental connection from the impending physical act. It felt as though they were already united in ways that couldn't be undone. Miranda guided him through the process, explaining that they would be using an advanced procedure that allowed their energies to synchronize, ensuring the conception of a child that would carry both their traits. There was no physical manipulation, no intrusive technology. It was about the union of their minds, and then their bodies would follow suit. Ethan wasn't sure what to expect, but Miranda reassured him that the connection would guide them both. He could sense her thoughts as they spoke, feel the unspoken understanding between them. And as the time grew nearer, the anxiety that had plagued him began to dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose. The chamber where they would carry out the final step was bathed in soft, bioluminescent light. It was serene, calming, like something out of a dream. Ethan stepped into the center, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. Miranda stood before him, her eyes wide with something he couldn't quite identify. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing her arm. He could feel the pulse of her thoughts, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat that seemed to match his own. She was nervous too, he realized. Despite her calm exterior, she was just as uncertain. "I'm ready," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions within him. Miranda nodded, her hand reaching for his. And in that instant, as they stood together in the soft glow of the chamber, they both felt it. An understanding that ran deeper than words. This wasn't just about saving a species. It was about the future. Their future. The air in the chamber was thick with anticipation, the soft hum of energy that filled the room vibrating in Ethan's bones. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before. There was a stillness, a kind of profound quiet, that made every heartbeat, every breath, feel like it was echoing in the vast expanse of space. He could sense Marana beside him, her presence an unspoken force that was both grounding and overwhelming. She reached for his hand, her cool fingers brushing against his skin. Ethan looked into her violet eyes, and for a brief moment, he thought he could see the future reflected in them. An uncertain path that stretched ahead, but one that was bound by a shared resolve. "I can feel your thoughts, Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bond we've formed is strong. It will guide us through this." Ethan didn't answer at first. He could feel her, yes, every emotion, every flicker of hesitation, every ounce of her fear and hope. And in return, she could feel him. The bond was complete. It wasn't just two minds merging. It was as if their very souls were touching, melding together, forging something greater than either of them. He swallowed hard, pushing away the remnants of his lingering doubts. His life had always been about control, about knowing the steps ahead. But this was different. This was about surrender. Surrendering to something larger than himself, to a responsibility that would change the course of history. "Ready?" Marana asked, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed the same nervousness he felt. Ethan nodded, even though a part of him still grappled with the enormity of the moment. "Yeah, ready?" They stepped closer to the center of the chamber, the glowing lines in the floor pulsating softly, resonating with an energy that seemed to vibrate in perfect harmony with the steady rhythm of their hearts. Marana's hand touched the back of his neck, her fingers cool against his heated skin. "Trust the bond," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "It will show you the way." Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time, he let go of all his reservations. The process was as much emotional as it was physical. Their minds, already intertwined by the bond, began to sync up in a way that transcended conscious thought. He could feel Marana's pulse in his veins, and in turn, she could feel his. The mental connection deepened, threading their consciousness together in a seamless flow of thought and sensation. It was like a spark, subtle at first, then growing, igniting a warmth between them. His thoughts drifted, the overwhelming feeling of her presence settling deep within his chest, filling the empty spaces with a sense of completeness. There was no fear, no hesitation anymore, just a shared certainty that this was the right choice. They were not two beings anymore. They were something new, something intertwined in ways that defied explanation. As they stood there, their hands still touching, the air seemed to shimmer around them, crackling with the energy of the bond they had formed. For a long moment, there was nothing but the soft, shared pulse of their connection. And then the moment shifted. Without warning, the air around them seemed to thicken, the energy in the room growing more intense. Marana's hand tightened on his, and he felt a surge of warmth flood through his chest. It was as though someone was pulling them deeper, guiding them into the next phase. The connection between them deepened even further, and Ethan felt a pull in his very soul. His thoughts became hazy, blurred with the powerful sensations coursing through his body. He could feel the link between them, a wave of shared emotions, memories, hopes, and dreams, and then something more. It was as though a seed had been planted in the very core of his being. A tiny spark of life, growing and expanding, becoming more than just the merging of their minds. It was the beginning of something new, something that neither of them could have fully anticipated. He gasped, his chest tightening as the overwhelming intensity of the experience washed over him. The warmth filled him, suffused every fiber of his being, and his heart began to beat in sync with Marana's. The sensation was almost too much to bear. Marana's breath hitched, her voice rising in a soft, melodic cry. It's happening," Ethan's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what was happening. He could feel it now, the energy of life taking root not just within Marana, but within both of them. The connection, the bond, was not just about creating a child. It was about the creation of something infinitely larger. A bridge between two species, a symbol of unity, and a beacon of hope. His chest tightened with a realization that struck him like a lightning bolt. The child they would create wouldn't just be born from their bodies. They would be born from their minds, their hearts, their shared hope for the future. This wasn't just about saving a species. It was about bringing something new into the universe, a new life that represented the very essence of unity and collaboration. Ethan leaned into Marana, his body trembling with the force of the shared connection. "We're doing this," he said, his voice rough. "We're really doing this." Marana nodded, her expression radiant with both awe and certainty. "Yes, Ethan. Together we are. This is the beginning." The energy in the room intensified, and Ethan felt a surge of warmth flood through him. It was as if the universe itself was affirming their choice. The air seemed to hum, charged with the power of creation. For a long moment, nothing else mattered. There was no war, no diplomatic crisis, no distant stars. There was only this shared moment of creation, of unity, of promise. And then, as quickly as it had come, the surge of energy faded. The connection between them lingered, still strong but no longer overwhelming. Ethan and Marana stood there in the afterglow of the moment, their breaths coming in deep, steadying breaths. The chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of energy that still resonated in the air. "We've done it," Marana whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "The first step." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with the enormity of what they had just done. But beneath the rush of emotions, there was something more. A sense of quiet certainty that they had forged something that would outlast them both. The days that followed felt like a blur to Ethan. The intensity of what had happened in the chamber, their union, the creation of new life, had left him with a sense of peace, but also a deep and unshakable responsibility. What they had done was far from ordinary. It was an act of hope, a chance to defy the natural course of extinction and bring forth a future neither of them could have anticipated alone. Marana had given him space after the ceremony, but there was no question in his mind that their bond was still alive, vibrant, and growing stronger every day. She was always there, a whisper in his mind, offering comfort and silent guidance as the days went on. Her presence had shifted from something foreign and strange to something undeniably familiar. He could feel her pulse, her thoughts, everything she was, and in return, she felt everything he was. Marana was no longer just the Zelithari ambassador. She wasn't just the woman he had agreed to help. She had become a part of him, just as he had become a part of her. They were partners now, not just in the sense of their mission, but in something far more profound and permanent. The first signs of change came within a few weeks. Marana's body responded to the conception process in ways that Ethan hadn't fully understood until now. Her physical form began to shift, subtly at first, and Ethan could feel the changes through their bond. There were no outward signs of pregnancy, not yet, but the energy between them pulsed with something new, something burgeoning. "I can feel it," Marana had said one evening, her voice filled with awe. "It's growing, Ethan. Our child is growing." Ethan had held her in silence, feeling the small ripple of life in the air, as if the universe itself were conspiring to help them succeed. He knew their child would be something extraordinary, but it was impossible to predict just what form that would take. News of their success spread quickly. The Zelithari had been watching closely, and it wasn't long before the first signs of change were felt throughout the population. There was a renewed sense of hope in the air, a quiet understanding that the Zelithari might yet have a future after all. The decision to allow their species to join forces with humanity had been a gamble, but one that was paying off. As more Zelithari women began to undergo the bonding process with human males, the results were consistently positive. The childbearing rate, though slow, began to rise. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was a start. However, for Ethan and Marana, the journey had only just begun. While the Zelithari's population was slowly stabilizing, they both knew there were larger, more complex forces at play. There were factions within the Zelithari who did not agree with their methods, with the idea of merging their species with humanity. Not everyone was comfortable with the idea of this new hybrid life form. There were critics who saw it as a betrayal of their identity, their purity. "You knew this would happen," Ethan said one evening, pacing in their private quarters. "There are always people who can't see the bigger picture. They don't understand what we're doing, what we have to do." Miranda sat quietly, watching him. "I know," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "And we will face them. But we are not alone in this. The humans are on our side now, and together, we will show them that this is the only way forward." Ethan nodded, his gaze turning inward. He had always been a soldier, trained to take action, to push forward in the face of adversity. But this was different. This wasn't about combat. This wasn't about winning or losing a battle. This was about change. About shaping the future, not through force, but through understanding, compassion, and cooperation. He reached out and took Miranda's hand, feeling the warmth of their connection. "I didn't sign up for this. But now, can't walk away." Miranda smiled, a rare softness in her expression. "Neither can I." The months that followed were a whirlwind of political and social turmoil, but also of hope. The Zelithari began to come together, slowly but surely, and the human alliance strengthened. For the first time in history, the two species were not just allies but partners in the truest sense of the word. They shared their knowledge, their technology, and most importantly, their vision for the future. Despite the dissenting voices, the success of the initial unions gave rise to a new era of understanding. Zelithari women and human men began to form lasting bonds, not just for the sake of saving their species, but for the chance at something greater. The hybrids that were born from these unions were different. They carried the strength of both races, an indomitable will to survive and to thrive. And for Ethan and Miranda, the birth of their child would be a pivotal moment. Their child would not only be a symbol of unity but also a sign of the enduring connection between their two peoples. The day of the birth arrived quietly, though it was anything but ordinary. Ethan stood by Miranda's side, holding her hand as they prepared to welcome their child into the world. The room was still, save for the faint hum of medical equipment, but there was a palpable energy in the air, a sense of anticipation, of destiny unfolding. "I'm scared," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if we fail?" Miranda squeezed his hand. "We will not fail. We have already succeeded. This child is our future, and the future of our people." Ethan nodded, drawing strength from her words. The hours passed slowly, but the moment their child was born was everything they had hoped for. The infant was unlike any other, a perfect blend of Zelithari and human traits, with smooth, pale skin and eyes that shone with a unique, otherworldly brilliance. Miranda looked at their child, her eyes brimming with tears. "We've done it," she whispered. "This is our legacy." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Their child was more than just a symbol. It was a living testament to what could be achieved when two species, two worlds, came together in cooperation and love. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is just the beginning." And as he gazed at the tiny life in Miranda's arms, he knew, without a doubt, that their decision had been the right one. The future was uncertain, but together, they had created something that would endure. Something that would change the course of history. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.